Hello, everybody, and welcome to this conversation with Rosemarie Milsom. My name is Dr. Matt Beard. I'm the Program Director of the Vincent Fairfax Fellowship at the Cranlana Centre for Ethical Leadership. Just wanted to start by saying Wamajeka and acknowledge I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd acknowledge their unceded sovereignty over the land. I want to extend that acknowledgement to all the different places where you might be joining from, and recognize that as part of the work that we do at Cranlana, we are bringing together different histories, different stories, different experiences that come across different places in country. And remember that when we're doing that and when we're gathering in those ways, that we are participating in something that's been happening in this country for tens of thousands of years, coming together in dialogue. Rosemarie, I know you're joining us from a Wabakul country, Kai. Thank you so much for being with us for this conversation.
It's great to be here.
So just for everyone here, before we kick things off, I just want to explain why we're having this conversation with Rosemarie today. Last year was kind of the 30-year anniversary of the Vincent Fairfax Fellowship. And as part of that sort of celebration, we spent a lot of time going out and talking to a lot of people who have done the program in the past to talk to them about where ethical challenges and ethical issues are showing up for them, how they're engaging in those in their leadership. And both through that conversation and through a range of the programs we run at Cranlana, one of the consistent messages that we are hearing is leaders feeling the weight of responsibility around where these broader challenges around polarization, values, conflict, and ethical disagreement are showing up for them within their set of responsibilities as a leader. They are needing to navigate those within their teams. They're needing to form a view for themselves about how they feel about working and collaborating with people who might hold different values or disagree about really critical issues. And they're having to try to help their organizations to navigate through those in environments where the stakes are really high, where there is no obvious answer, and where there is really strong disagreement about what the right course of action is. So it feels like a really valuable moment to have a conversation with someone who not only has experience in curating how to bring together environments where people can hold conflicting or contradictory ideas and explore and interrogate them in ways that feel productive and constructive, but also has been on the front lines of some very visible, very high stakes decisions where there has been something significantly ethical at stake. And in Rosemarie Milsom, who is herself a VFF alumni and also is the founding director of the Newcastle Writers Festival and the incoming director of Adelaide Writers Week, feels like the perfect person to have this conversation with. So Rosemarie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and have this chat today.
I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to try to change while we're talking my name, if that's okay, just because, well, I'm no longer on deck at Newcastle Writers Festival as of a week ago. I've just started the handover. So it still feels a bit, I'm sort of still in between in a sense, in some ways. But yes, I've been juggling the two roles, Adelaide and Newcastle, really for a couple of months. So, but yeah, look, it's fantastic to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And part of the conversation will absolutely focus on this question of disagreement, but there's also a really important conversation to be had about that sort of knowing when it's time to let go of something that you've built, something that's important to you, those moments of transition. And we'll absolutely have a chance to talk about that. But just wondering, by way of starting things off, Rosemarie, in the VFF, we sometimes run this kind of autobiographical activity where we get people to sort of write their story backwards from where they are now and how that flows backwards in time. And sometimes we get some pretty clear insights into what is driving them, the kind of values that are informing their leadership and the way they work. And I just wonder, whether there's an opportunity for a little bit of autobiography, the story of, what your leadership journey has been and how it's brought you into this new role coming in as the director of the Adelaide Writers Week.
I'll try to do a really condensed version.
I'm going to start at the details interesting.
I'm going to start at the beginning really quickly. I think in terms of leadership, when you're born the eldest of six children, it's almost given that you are going to have to take on responsibility at a pretty young age. So I think that was really, really foundational for me. And also my mother, for most of my childhood, was a single mother. So a single parent who worked and she studied. She did postgrad. Life was hectic, and I was often, called on to assist where I could with my siblings. And so, you know, to support her. And I think in a way that's where leadership started. And we moved a lot. So I went to 8 schools in 13 years. And every time I started at a new school, when I was in primary school, found it always awkward to start a new school. Let's just say that. I never just sort of glided into a new school and felt at ease. But I developed kind of coping strategies, and particularly in high school, because it's a lot tougher in high school. Everyone's got their group of friends. So I would often, when I started a new school, sign up for all the sport teams. I'd seek out the English teacher who looked after the debating team, and I'd join the debating team. These are things that were going to push me out of my comfort zone. But I knew if I didn't sort of find my people and instead of retreat, you know, kind of push myself to do these things, that I would struggle to kind of make friends and to find my place in a new school. So there are a couple of key things. And I suppose the other really big event that happened to me quite young was that I had my first child when I was a university student. And that was a decision not a single person thought was the right decision, except my partner at the time. So, you know, I defied everyone around me, university lecturers, everyone, friends, who just thought it was crazy that I would give up uni, that I wouldn't have a future. And in a sense, that's been a pretty driving force in motivating me to keep going with everything and, in a sense, prove myself. That was very much a predominant theme in my 20s. I wanted to be a journalist. I became a journalist. Got a cadetship when my son was 3 or 4, and I didn't tell anybody I had a child. No one had children, particularly not as a young journalist. So I have always had to, from a very young age, juggle work and life and family life. I think I'm very adept at being able to deal with a lot of stuff at once. So I might have had a sleepless night with a baby and had a university presentation the next day, or I've had to go and cover really traumatic events as a journalist. So fatal car crashes, mining disasters, ultralight crash. I've watched bodies being pulled out of, water at golf clubs, and then go home and cook dinner and check my son's homework. And I think that has been so informative in terms of drawing boundaries. I'm not necessarily always good at drawing boundaries, but I think that that's helped me really compartmentalize work and home life as much as possible so they don't bleed into each other. Although now I've worked at home for a decade, I find that's one problem where I'm at home working, and the kids are hearing phone calls and they're hearing the stress and they're hearing me deal with media interviews. And that's been in the last sort of, particularly the last few months. So I'm very aware that that's challenging that I work from, now that I work from home. But, I think that being a journalist was really pivotal. I think I've underestimated at times how much journalism has shaped me.
How has it shaped you?
I think I've probably always been an activist, and I know that being an activist as a journalist is a difficult thing. And I wasn't, you can never be overtly an activist. I mean, it's a free for all in a sense, particularly because people have podcasts and they're not journalists, professional journalists, but this idea that you have a right to sort of have an opinion and drive a perspective. I was very much trained in the Fairfax model. So the Fairfax model of journalism, we had a code of conduct, and we had a code of ethics. Quality was the absolute doctrine. It felt like I was indoctrinated as a Fairfax journalist from a very young age, because Newcastle Herald, where I started my career, was a Fairfax newspaper. And then I went to Sydney to the Sun Herald. And that's why I ultimately left print journalism, because the values that I'd been trained in and was indoctrinated in, which were important to me, we became misaligned. And I was on the union and in negotiations around job losses and redundancies, and I was sitting across from managers. And I remember clearly asking this question, if you remove all the sub-editors or reduce their numbers, it's going to affect quality. And this person, who had also been indoctrinated in the Fairfax mantra of quality, just said, yeah, we're prepared to sacrifice that. And I just remember at that very moment, I looked at him and I thought, okay, I'm done. I didn't say it, but I thought, I can't, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. Um, and that's really interesting because I needed the money and I loved journalism. It was as though the career had been invented for me and all the skills I had and what I wanted to do with my life. And I loved it so deeply. And there was an absolute grief around when I left a newspaper for the last time. I walked out and I was just grief stricken. And I knew it would be the last time. And probably took 3 years to really, really let it go. And then I did go into broadcasting and presenting at ABC. But deep down, newspapers were so important to me. And it was painful. And I know a lot of colleagues have been through the same process. It's a really painful process because I was good at my job. I did really good work, but I had a kind of fracture. It was like a fracture that happened. It was about that. And then there was a personal issue as well, where a family member was in the media a lot and I was suddenly in the media and on the other side of it and dealing with journalism calls when my family was going through a very traumatic event. And I think at the time I didn't comprehend or fully grasp what effect that had on me. But I think in hindsight now I can see that it damaged me quite deeply. And I think that I just could no longer do the thing that was being done to me and go into people's lives and expect them to speak with you. Even though I was an ethical and fair journalist, I also knew I wanted the story. I also knew that there's a way to manipulate people. Journalists manipulate. I mean, that's ultimately a big realization I came to. And then I went through a real period of shame, actually, at times of thinking about having been a journalist. And I would say I was a good, fair journalist. But I also know that there are times where I wanted the story, and you don't have to barge in people's doors to manipulate people to get the story. And I was very good at it. I can read people very well. But anyway, jump ahead to starting the Writers Festival. While I was working full-time as a journalist, I felt disheartened and upset, and I wanted to put my energy and ideas into something that would be a positive thing. And I felt I couldn't do that with journalism anymore. That was one of the reasons I started Newcastle Writers Festival. I started working on the first one in 2012, and I stayed at the Newcastle Herald for 3 years after that and ran the festival and full-time journalism career. And 3 children, but my 2 younger children were under 4 when I started Newcastle. So again, that juggling of professional life, of different projects, of family life, it's kind of shaped how I operate.
You can hear a lot of threads coming through, right? There's this sense of, as you said, that from a very early stage, there was a level of, I've got 5 siblings as well. There's an element of chaos that comes with that kind of life. And I hear really strong threads through that change, that you forced yourself to get comfortable with discomfort. You put yourself in environments that challenged you and stretched you to build some resilience. And those 2 things together let you forge a pretty unconventional path. You were a parent younger than most, you're going through your cadetship, and then to parallel process and take that sense of, I'm not really happy with the way that journalism is shaping up. I want to go somewhere else. And to take that and direct it towards something else. You can see how that narrative is kind of building together to get you to the place where, yeah, you did run the Newcastle Writers Festival and put yourself in that environment. And I want to move forward now to kind of 10 years or more later, when you've taken on this new role at Adelaide Writers Week. So we've got the story. We're skipping ahead a really critical part, which is all those years of kind of blood, sweat, and tears into the Newcastle Writers Festival to now. So as many people would know, Adelaide Writers Week didn't run this year as the result of some of the fallout from a decision to disinvite Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah. And it's likely that your decisions as an incoming director are going to be heavily scrutinised. And on top of that, you're also leaving the Newcastle Writers Festival, which is something that you built from scratch and have been with for a really long time. So how did you know that this was the right time, the right move? And as you take on this new role, what are you thinking about?
My daughter reminded me when I told her about Adelaide that I'd been offered the job. She said, "Oh, I remember years ago you saying you wanted to work at Adelaide Writers." She said Writers Festival. It's called Writers Week. I I'd sort of forgot. I didn't even know I'd ever said that out loud, to be honest. I've always admired the festival. I've attended Adelaide Writers Week. I absolutely love that the accessibility of it. I mean, it's free, largely free, 95% free in a garden in the centre of Adelaide while the bigger Adelaide Festival's happening and Fringe is happening and when Madelaide's happening. Like, I mean, it's just an extraordinary place to be at that time. And I am so passionate about literature and breaking down barriers that prevent people from engaging with literature, that Adelaide is the pinnacle to me. To be able to have, 95% of the program for free is extraordinary. I mean, in 2025, 150,000 people attended that festival. I just, so I'd probably deep down always aspired to go and work there. And the job came up 3 or 4 years ago, and I wasn't ready. And the kids were younger, and I knew that there were things I had to do professionally. I knew that I needed to build my international standing because it's an international festival, and that was something that was limiting me in Newcastle. So I have gone out and sought out opportunities. I'm now on the steering committee of the Global Association of Literary Festivals. I'm in a WhatsApp chat with 45 people from around the world, all festival directors. I can jump on and say, does anyone have a policy on this? Or what platform do you use to manage volunteers? And I'll have someone from India, America, so that's been not only for my own sort of sense of career progression, but also personally, I like working collegially. I just really, really like it. I like having a sounding board. So when Adelaide came up this year after what happened, I consulted a couple of key people in my life and said, am I crazy for wanting to step in at this point? Because I feel really compelled to, and I have very strong instincts, and I often I'm very careful, but I can make really bold decisions when it just involves myself. So when it's for me and what I think where I should be or what will challenge me, often that's a decision that everyone else might look at and say, that's crazy. Like starting a writers' festival, everyone thought that was crazy. Having a child at 20, everyone thought that was crazy. Going into broadcast radio, broadcast journalism. And so this was another one of those decisions that I thought, on the outside, people will go, why would you do that? That's crazy. But I know myself. I know myself really well. And I knew that the skill set I had and my leadership journey and where I wanted to be, and that sounds so kind of, I don't know, American soap opera, my journey, but it just seemed so right to
Do you
me.
think that sense of willing to make kind of bold decisions and the kind of the tendency you have to do that sometimes when we're dealing with sort of these high stakes ethical decisions, we'll focus in on those in a sec, but they ultimately become a kind of dilemma between what's right and what's safe for a leader and for an organization. Do you think that you've got a different sort of litmus test for kind of safe versus right decisions that has served you really well in some of those kinds of pointy decisions?
I don't really think in terms of what's safe. I honestly don't think that I frame decisions within that context ever. So like, yeah, I don't know. I think because I don't know how I'd even think of safe. Like, is safe just, staying with a journalism job for the rest of my career that I'll be miserable in every single day? I mean, is that safe? Is that what you mean in the terms of safe?
What I mean is, well, I'm more trying to think in terms of the conversation that we'll have, and maybe we'll focus in on sort of some of the decisions that you have to make as a director of a writers' festival.
Yeah.
Who's getting invited? There's pressure to disinvite someone. And where there has been heavy scrutiny on organizations taking a view or taking certain action, I think we do see statements and actions that are a little bit like milquetoast in sort of the way that they sort of try to deal with things.
Yeah, okay.
They try to say something that's not really anything at all, as opposed to doing what might be the the more controversial strategy, something that where they're putting their neck out a little bit for a principle or something that's important. And I think I see a different attitude in the way that you're talking about decisions you make for yourself, but also that manifests in some of the decisions that you've made across the course of your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where the journalist in me comes in very heavily. I don't believe that anything on a piece of paper is going to get you out of trouble. I don't believe in public statements because I've been on the receiving end of them as a journalist, and you know how superficial and worthless they are. They are used as a get out of jail card. They're a box ticking exercise. Often outside corporate interests are brought in to advise you on that. They don't know your culture. They don't know really, you might bring a corporate consultant in to help you with a crisis who doesn't understand how the arts industry works, and that, or particularly then drill down into literature. I think that often panic sets in with an organisation when there's a hint of a crisis. And instead of responding, there's a reaction. It's like, we've got to react. And I see panic. I've observed it with organisations around me. I've observed it. I haven't observed it at Newcastle Writers Festival because panic never really set in. But I think that you could have 100 policies sitting in a folder on your desktop somewhere, and the whole organisation could have access, and the board and everyone could have access to those policies, and they're absolutely meaningless. They're absolutely meaningless. They're good as a guardrail. If you need to work out how much money can I spend on my credit card or whatever, I'm allowed to, or what's the travel policy, but if the culture isn't there, the policy is absolutely worthless. It's just a file. It might as well be, I don't know. It's meaningless. So I think I see a disconnect between entities from just going into panic mode, not pausing, and this often happens as a result of the media. So this is where I can see the steps that go wrong. The Australian, no doubt, let's say it's going to no doubt be News Corp on the phone. It might not be, but people will most panic if News Corp gets on the phone. And I just watch people go to absolute water over that. And I just sit back and go, who's News Corp at the end of the day? Are they a key stakeholder of yours? What about your donors? What about your audience? What about the artists you represent? Like in the hierarchy, or if you're going to do a chart of stakeholders, where does media truly sit? And if your priority is managing the media on the day a crisis starts taking hold, and all those other stakeholders get pushed to the side, you are in serious trouble. And also, if you don't already have a solid relationship with those stakeholders, if you haven't done the work, if you're not engaged, if it's a token gesture every now and then to engage with your stakeholders, then you're in trouble.
Can we dive into the detail of a specific decision? So and you're in a really interesting position, particularly around the decision to disinvite Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah, because you're coming into the role as the director of Adelaide Writers Week, where they took one course of action that had significant consequences for the organisation. But you also face pressure at the Newcastle Writers Festival to also disinvite her for similar kinds of reasons. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience at Newcastle Writers Festival and reflections on what you were leaning on to try to navigate the pressures there, and also any views you have about the decision that was made, even though it was before your time in Adelaide?
Well, I think it's really important, that people realise that it's not a one-woman show. Look, the bulk of the work has been done at Newcastle Writers Festival by me, but in terms of big decisions, there's a board and a really, really incredible board of people who are committed to the organisation. We're very aligned. It doesn't mean we necessarily agree on everything, but there's just core principles, and we don't have a lot of policies. Newcastle, I should say, and I've got to stop saying we because I'm no longer part of the organisation, but I'm on the board though. I'm staying on the board in the transition process. So I still am in a sense. But there's not a lot of policies at Newcastle Writers Festival. There's key ones, child safe, because we have going to schools. But in terms of a decision like inviting Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah, I mean, that was a decision that I'd made in August prior to, and people might remember that preceding Adelaide was Bendigo Writers Festival having an issue and not going ahead as well over a code of conduct issue. Again, I could look at that and think, oh my goodness, that's such a fraud. It inevitably was going to lead to trouble. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's like you're watching a train wreck, and I can see things. That's probably experience, but also very strong intuition about how things are going to end up. And I'm very good at preempting things, and I'm very good at taking in something and seeing through to the end where it could possibly end up. I've got a very, very strong sense of that. So I'm onto things very early. So when Bendigo was, and I'd already invited Randa before Bendigo because of her book. So very important to remind everybody on the strength of her book. And now she's Miles Franklin's shortlisted writer. So there's value in reminding people that it wasn't a political statement. It's not to be overtly controversial, despite what you might read. It's on the basis of her book, which is what I make all curatorial decisions on: the work, the quality of the work, the ideas in the work, the themes that I think could feed into a bigger program. The multitude of thinking process happens when you're pulling together a program. And never, ever are you thinking, well, I don't think, oh, I want to be controversial, so I'm going to go for that. Because that's also a recipe for disaster, because if you have to defend that decision and you don't know the work and the work's not strong, I mean, good luck trying to defend it. So I'm confident in defending my program, and I feel like you should be as the curator, that if something's called into question, you've done the work and you can defend it confidently. And that's what I did. I took it to the board when Bendigo imploded. I said, we need to be monitoring this. I've also invited her, Dr. Abdul Fattah, and at that stage, I don't know if she'd accepted, but I just alerted the board straight up. I said, we need to be monitoring this. And then other events came in and other things happened. And then Bondi happened, the horrific event in Bondi. A couple of people said to me, is this going to affect your program? So no one knew who we had in the program, but colleagues or people in the sector said, are you concerned? And I said, not at this stage. We'll just monitor. And again, talking to the board. And this is another unusual circumstance. I am on the board. So the division between operations and curation that often exists in most boards wasn't there. So information is transferred across the board and myself in a very organic way because I'm part of the board. So and I'm not saying that's a model for everybody, but I'm the founder. And so the board, I've always said to the board, the minute you feel I should step off or it'll be better for me to step off, please let me know. And they've always said, no, please stay on, please stay on. This is prior to me leaving. But I'm very aware now. I mean, if we find in 6 months that everything's ticking over well, I'll step away. I won't wait for the next AGM. But I think that we, as an organisation, know what we stand for. And we're very clear about what we do. And I think sometimes it's a very simple question you can ask yourself as an organisation is, why do we do what we do? And if it's to appease media, if it's to keep one section of your stakeholder engagement happy, but ignore 90% of your stakeholders, so appease a donor, but cause distress to your artists, then you probably got the balance wrong. So writers are the reason I started the Writers Festival, writing. And so, it's embedded in how I operate. And I suppose my approach permeates the way the organisation operates. And I have incredible chair to work with. So having a strong chair, we align, we have a strong relationship. And the other aspect of this is she's a comms expert. So I'm the journalist, she's a comms expert, and we'll see things differently. I mean, comms language could start to creep into something and I'll go, yeah, no, let's pull back on that. That's just a bit too wishy-washy or a bit too, I don't know. I've got a real sensibility around that language. And also I can handle the media because I've been a journalist. Doesn't mean it doesn't cause me immense stress. But I know that the chair of Newcastle Writers Festival, Kate Robinson, is there to guide, to help me clarify my thinking around my response. And so, in a sense, I have to give credit to how we've responded to everyone around us, around me, I should say. I've obviously put certain views to the board. What if they'd ever disagreed with me? What if they'd said, we think you do need to disinvite Dr. Abdul Fattah? Well, I would have left the organisation. But that's nothing that's ever had to it's never even been thought about or considered or a concern.
Mm. Can we zoom out? Because part of this, I think it's important to think about these decisions in the context of the broader environment that we're operating in and the kind of the moment that we're living through, where some of the most urgent questions that people are facing are questions of polarization, social division, and the way that information is being siloed and people's challenges in navigating kind of values conflict and ethical disagreement. So I guess looking from your experience as someone who has been in the world of kind of curating ideas and bringing different views together, what does this mean for the role of the arts and for the role of kind of writers' festivals and ideas festivals? And how does it make it harder for that work to actually happen?
I think it's incredibly demanding. I think it's really stressful. By and large, arts organisations are smaller. They are reliant on government funding. You're vulnerable. So that's what makes everybody panic, because the vulnerability around how you exist, everyone, one lost grant opportunity, and you're kind of holding on to the cliff edge all the time around finances. And so I appreciate when I can flip it, I can sort of say, do you care about that donor over your artist? But I can also appreciate the dilemma. If that donor is the financial contribution keeping your organisation afloat, then that donor is going to have significant weight. So I hope I didn't sound too flippant when I said that, because I do understand the precarity, and that creates a dynamic that can cause panic, where if people agitate against you, you can feel this immense pressure. And the incident this year with Dr. Abdul Fattah, I mean, we've got Newcastle Writers Festival had an experience 2 years before that. There were calls for a boycott because we had 2 writers in the program who had very strong views about what was happening in Gaza and opposite views. And so we were under enormous pressure from people who supported Israel and people who supported the Palestinian cause. So we sort of were getting real pressure from both sides to remove artists. And also artists were feeling like they should call a boycott. There was agitation around a boycott of Newcastle Writers Festival. And the reason you probably don't know about it, and I have mentioned in interviews after that, but at the time no one knew about it, because I sensed that something was going to happen. And so weeks and weeks before, I started consulting our stakeholders in case something happened. And that included the artists, and that included particularly artists who I knew were feeling torn about supporting a boycott and felt they needed to, they felt compelled to do something. They were really hard discussions. And at that time, I thought a boycott would likely cripple our organisation. It could very likely have crippled the organisation if writers pulled out and we had to cancel half the program, which is then really just an unravelling of the whole event. So there was a lot at stake. There were no generic statements. It was one-on-one, Zooms with key people, key writers. If I couldn't meet them in person, phone calls to others. It was meeting Jewish representatives in Newcastle. It was going to the mosque here and talking to the imam and saying what would help people feel safe at the festival. It was the willingness to just listen. And if we jump ahead to Adelaide, that's the approach I'm taking now with this role. I mean, I'm coming into an environment that people have very strong views. People are very upset about what happened. And every room I walk into in Adelaide, the air is thick with expectation. I can feel it. I've had to do a lot of speeches. I'm doing a lot of meetings. I'm in Adelaide tomorrow. I arrive tomorrow and I'm there for over a week, and my schedule's crazy, and I'm meeting with as many people as I can, and I'm listening. I'm just listening. I don't get defensive. don't sugarcoat it. Like, what happened was regrettable, and that's putting it politely. So, there's no use saying, okay, let's move on. I don't dictate when people move on. People move on when they're ready to move on. But I also have to drive things forward. So while ever I'm talking to people and taking on their views, I also have a job to do. I'm having to deal with handover at Newcastle, which has been happening and is monumental after 14 years, while also coming into an environment in Adelaide that is unlike any situation possibly ever before for an arts organisation, maybe internationally, where an event has cancelled because of political reasons, and then you've got to come in after it. And I'm trying to think of other, because I look all the time, what can I use as a guide? What else has happened? What could I learn? I'm always looking for other examples or other, and trying to seek people out and say, okay, you went through that. Could you talk to me about what you learned, what you do differently? I think that's one of my skills, is that I'm always learning. I'm always open to learning, and I love listening and trying to, like, I'm not set. It's okay, this is how I am. This is Rosemarie Milsom. This is how I lead. Like, this experience in Adelaide and Newcastle, though, the coming together of those two huge things, succession planning, handing over to two new people. So my job was split into two. So I'm handing over to two people. The community response here, my farewell here, which is a really, sad for me and also joyous event a couple of weeks ago, but also in Adelaide, moving forward, dealing with stakeholders there, reassuring people. Like, I all I know is that I'm take it one step at a time, and I'm going to have learnt an immense amount from this. And that will have true value, not just to me, because I'm I'm not miserly with what I learn. I like sharing. And if, I've shared with other organizations how to navigate political tensions, not saying this is the Bible, but this is what I've learned. So I will share what it's like to do succession planning. What would I do differently? What have I learned from it? That alone, I'm always writing in my head as well, like writing, oh, this is what I'd write about this. So I just still think like a journalist. If I ever get time, and I think there will be time at some point, but I'd like to share with a broader community, do you stay or do you go? It's the founder's dilemma. So I'm doing a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but I suppose
I like that idea of thinking about the role that writing plays is it helps you have to organize your thinking to be able to write something. And that means that you're a little bit more responsive and a little bit less reactive, perhaps. I want to pull on a couple of the questions that are coming through. So one of the ones that I was quite interested in is this question around, you mentioned having a conversation with the imam about, what would help people to feel safe at the festival. But obviously, festivals or writers' weeks, they have a wider kind of community impact as well. And so I'm interested in how you weigh on those kinds of things. And just to be a little bit provocative around that, I did read you saying that, if Pauline Hanson has written the next great crime novel, then you want to know about it. Now, I can imagine a lot of stakeholders in a literary event being really concerned about it lending credibility and a platform to someone like Pauline Hanson. So how do you think about that broader set of network and community impacts about some of the decisions that you might make curatorially?
Pauline Hanson was invited to speak about her best-selling new crime novel that was a solid book that I read and thought, this person has written a really incredible book. She'd been invited to talk about the book. She wouldn't be there. Like, she's not at a political rally. She's not at a meeting with donors. She's there as a writer to speak about the ideas in her book. And a lot of thought goes into moderation at writers' festivals. There's conversations between the director and the moderators. Then there's conversations leading up to the event between the moderator and the writers. So, I mean, someone could go completely, off plan and just start chanting random political statements at the top of their voice and racist. But I mean, that's just highly, highly unlikely at a writers' festival because of the amount of preparation and considered work that goes into the event before it's even held. So there's a hell of a lot of work that happens behind the scenes. And this is what I pushed back against when Adelaide imploded, because there was an agenda running in the media that would make you think writers' festivals were political rallies where people were handed microphones. and had an unfettered sort of access to a community that they could just say whatever they wanted. That is not what a writers' festival is, and anyone who's been to one will know that. It's just not. That's not how they operate. And what people don't see is the work behind the scenes. And I know this because every journalist who interviewed me once I was appointed to Adelaide said to me, "So you'll keep doing both festivals?" And I just thought, are you serious? Like, how could someone even manage two festivals? So I understand people don't actually get what goes into holding a writers' festival. Like logistically, I mean, I already was working 7 days a week. I mean, there's just not enough hours in the day, barely to run one festival, let alone two. But the fact I got asked that by every journalist, and other people have commented to me and said, "Oh, so you're staying and you're not moving to Adelaide, so you'll run both festivals?" And I'm just thinking, how is that possible?
I hear you on that there are some safeguards and measures in place, but if we're thinking just about impact, even with those measures in place, there would be an impact on refugees, on DV survivors, on a number of different groups of people. Were someone, and we're talking very hypothetically here. I don't think Pauline
like
has
that,
a crime
it's
novel
probably
on the
not
way.
a good example. I was joking,
But
sort of joking.
just thinking about that, the wider community, the wider footprint of those kinds of decisions, because I mean, as you would know, there's a really established debate about to what extent we can separate the art and the artist when it comes to these kinds of questions. And so I guess thinking about that where someone is not just their work, even if that's all they are there to talk about, what kind of weighing goes into those questions?
A lot goes into it. And I mean, we can use Tony Abbott as an example. He has a book out and he was invited to festivals this year. I didn't invite him to Newcastle. I think the book may have been out in time for Newcastle this year, but I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, look at my audience. I'm in a Labor town. Newcastle's a Labor town. It has been, at many points, 3 levels of government. At this point, just 2, but still a Labor-dominated local council. It just there'd be curiosity around that book maybe, and 30 people would turn up. In all honesty, there'd be curiosity around Tony Abbott, but by and large, this audience, it just wouldn't have been their cup of tea. But if we had anyone, like we've had Julia Gillard, because your audience, so that's the other factor that comes into play. What does your audience want? So I have certain, I'll read a book and think this is a good book, and I know that instinctively. I know what a good book is and what a good writer and what good writing looks like. And I am very confident in defending my view about that. Some people might disagree with certain books because it's not their style or they think it's over. You can have those nitty-gritty subjective discussions. But I think you look at your audience. Yeah, I just think that if there's someone who has personal views around certain issues, they're allowed to have them. Having a political platform added on, like we're using Pauline Hanson as an example, is probably an unusual situation. I was just joking with at that time, like trying to, almost just because the media were being absurd, I kind of was absurd back. But I think that by and large, a writer who has views about certain things, whether they support a certain type of political view or they're allowed to, like they actually are allowed to have personal views. And an invitation to a writers' festival is not an endorsement of those personal views. It's just not. They're invited to the writers' festival on the strength of their work. And so I think that's a clear statement. We have a statement, Newcastle Writers Festival on freedom of expression, and that is one of the key principles, is that writers are citizens. They're allowed to have views about things and they're allowed to express those views. And inviting someone to the Writers' Festival is not an endorsement of those personal views. But obviously there are boundaries. We have legislation around it. So that is a clear boundary. Hate speech. There are of course examples where you would disinvite someone because they breached legislation or the law. And we have not had that. We've not had anybody that I've had to consider in that framework.
Mm. I'm curious about the sort of, because you mentioned this sense of people not really understanding a little bit of how the Rare Festival operates. Sort of certainly, I've had similar conversations within galleries about the process of curation there, that they're somewhat opaque and people don't quite understand what's involved with them. And I'm interested in, as you know, someone who is leading now the Adelaide Writers Week that's trying to rebuild, or I think you've used the language of repair a little bit after a regrettable incident or a mistake. Um, I'm kind of wondering about that sense of responsibility that's not on you, but is also kind of responsibility that's on us as the wider community in terms of as spectators or critics or citizens who witness an organization who gets something wrong or does something controversial, how should we react? How should we respond to those things so that there's maybe a little bit more room for space and nuance? Maybe there's a little bit more opportunity for repair, and there's a little bit less of this instinct to kind of to cancel, to move on, to kind of eliminate that space for repair and redemption that sometimes is really critical.
I'm trying to think if there's an example where an organization has actually folded after a bad decision. I don't think it's ever got to that point. There might be, taking time out to review or do an internal kind of repositioning. So I think that in, I'm torn because I think people are allowed to have views. So I don't think people should be silent around something that they believe they disagree with. I mean, we live in, well, currently we live in a democracy. I think we take it for granted, and possibly, it is becoming increasingly under pressure. But I think that an organisation should be able to take steps to rebuild the damage. So, and people should give them that grace. But that doesn't mean you have to, initially say, oh, I'm just going to sit back and watch, because, I think that organizations, we're all stakeholders, particularly in certain organizations. And so, really strong, overwhelming response to something you've done is cause to take it extremely seriously. And getting that confidence back from stakeholders is, it's not a given. It's not a given. So decisions are made, I think, well, obviously with Adelaide, the board, there's a new board. I mean, I think there could have been no choice but to have a new board, because I don't think anyone would have put their hand up to take on the role of director. You couldn't have done that with any confidence. So, I think that was one of the main reasons I felt confident looking at working for the organisation, was that there was a new board, and they sent a very strong message early on about how they were going to operate and respond to what had happened. And so I suppose taken a risk, put my faith in that board, and so far I'm confident with how everything's going, and they're really strong, and it's just been expanded. So now there's more members of the board. That's happened recently in Adelaide, which is really fantastic. And there's going to be some continuity. So some core members who came on after this year's cancellation are staying on, which is really good. And so I think that corporations can get it wrong. Arts organisations can get it wrong. All sorts of entities can get it wrong. And sometimes they just get it so wrong that they do need to hear the backlash, and they do need to know the backlash, and they do need to respond accordingly. So I think that, yes, we should all give people grace, but there have to be indications that there's going to be grace on the other side as well.
Yeah. Really different track of thinking, but I really love this question from Charlotte Wood about, the potential effects of AI, both good and bad, on kind of ethical leadership, in particular in the arts. So it's obviously something else that's on everyone's minds at the moment. Rosemarie, do you have any views
about AI?
AI and how it might have impact on the kind of particularly on ethical leadership in the arts?
Oh, how can I don't even know. I mean, I'm not sure if you're going to AI for guidance on ethics as an organization, or if you're using AI to help you draft programs or policies or responses, then I would be seriously concerned and worried. but I'm just as worried about organisations who can't work on it internally and have to call in external consultants all the time and have to, like, I do think there's a tendency to think we need help, and it has to come from the outside. And if we don't have, all those people coming and giving us their 2 cents worth, then how do we know we're getting it right? Like, I feel, as an organisation, if internally when you meet, if you don't have a sense of where you sit and how everyone's values align and how they align with the organisation's purpose, then you possibly need to do a bit of work. And AI is going to be the least of your concerns. But I
Let me
I
throw a
haven't thought too
hypothetical at
deeply.
you
I mean,
that
I've thought deeply about AI and the impact on writers,
And
on
that's what I was
literature.
going to ask is let's say that there are some roles where AI can create, some productivity or efficiency in ticketing or a range of different roles within writers' festivals. But we also know that and you mentioned, going back to your key stakeholders and the impact on them, that a huge number of your stakeholders as writers have experienced what they see as intellectual property theft as a result of these training models and things like that. And so where would those kinds of how would you go about, and it's another example of that kind of community engagement and decision making in these sort of very fraught sort of ethical spaces, what would you be thinking about?
I'd be thinking about the material you're putting out into public. I'd be making sure that program content is not generated by AI, that it's humanly written. I mean, look, I'm responsible for the program material, the copy in that program. So I would, in the very least, make sure that everyone's aware that AI is not to be used for that. That would be my view. Other writers' festivals might have a different view. I'm not sure, but me personally, I think any material you use, and I know that we used an illustration this year that someone I know generated. He's an artist, and the creative agency we used to help with our collateral was concerned that it might look AI because he does this for a living, and I know him personally. So they felt that we might have to put a statement inside our program that said this image was not generated by AI. And I said, I am not doing that. Can we just have his signature on it? Like it's an art piece. And if it's his signature's there, then to me that's legitimate. That's saying this is the artist putting his name to this image, and no AI has been used. So I think we're going to, that public, those public documents, what we're putting out into the public, my view is AI is not to be engaged. And I know a British festival got into all sorts of trouble, literature festival got into trouble because it embraced the theme of AI as part of its programming, and then got AI to generate, the creative agency used an AI generated image for all the collateral. But they made that public, and they thought this is a clever way. And I understood what they were trying to do, but there was a huge backlash from artists who said, how could you do this? It's a writers' festival and you're putting an AI generated image on the cover of the program and all your collateral. So I'm very, very careful that anything, and I know myself because I'm writing the program copy, that is not generated by AI, that it's but I'm a journalist as well. So I have strength as a writer. So I could see possibly how that might creep in. People preparing the program are going to turn to AI to get assistance with copy. And I think you have to have a clear stance as an organisation about it. But separately, and we won't go into it now because that's a whole other topic, AI and literature, I have very strong views about. And it's alarming. It's an existential, like it is really distressing if you start going down, start even contemplating where we're going to end up with it. It's really, really alarming. And I find writers' concerns about it absolutely valid.
We've reached the end of our time, Rosemarie. We often say in kind of programs and discussions that we run at Cranlana that conversations are often over before they're done. We leave some questions unresolved. There are things that still we leave on the table. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, Rosemarie, and for giving us an insight into what it looks like to be at the coalface of not just having to have a view on what's happening, but actually to navigate some of these choices and what goes into bringing these kinds of forums together and navigating those really pointy questions. Thank you as well to everyone who has joined us. You'll be receiving some information. So part of the conversation is that we are opening up applications for next year's Vincent Fairfax Fellowship. We haven't talked much about that, the fact that Rosemarie is a fellow, but we are opening up for next year's cohort at the moment. We're also going to be sending you a copy. I mentioned that research that we did with some of our alumni at the end of last year, of which Rosemarie was a participant, where we kind of took some insights into why this was an important conversation to have. So a couple of things to look out for there. But Rosemarie, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it and learn a lot in the conversation.
My pleasure.